Deep in the forgotten woodlands of Pine Creek, Oregon, where sunlight filtered through ancient trees, Rebecca Anderson stood before a weathered cabin. Her three children huddled close, their faces still damp from the relentless rain. 2 weeks ago, she had been a respected office manager at Horizon Financial. Today, she was jobless, homeless, and desperate. The cabin, its windows clouded with decades of dust, seemed to call to her like an answered prayer. The journey to this moment began 14 days earlier in a sterile corporate conference room. Rebecca sat stunned, the termination letter trembling in her hands. 12 years of dedication ended with a corporate restructuring in a 2-minute conversation. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. The decision comes from headquarters." Her supervisor avoided eye contact, fidgeting with his expensive watch. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance." Her belongings fit into a single cardboard box. Family photos, a coffee mug gifted by her team, and a small plant that had survived years of fluorescent lighting. The whispers followed her through the open floor plan. Good employees reduced to spectators of her humiliation, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. It wasn't them. Rebecca held her head high, though her insides crumbled with each step toward the elevator. The security guard, a man who had greeted her by name every morning for over a decade, now awkwardly extended his hand for her badge. "Just procedure, ma'am." The metal doors closed on her former life, and she allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of tears before composing herself. The children would need her strength tonight. That evening, Rebecca stared at her apartment ceiling, calculating finances while her children slept. The severance would barely cover rent. No savings after putting Olivia through braces and Noah's asthma treatments last year. The job market for office managers had dried up in their small town, flooded with similar corporate casualties. Olivia found her mother at the kitchen table the next morning, surrounded by job listings and rejected applications. "We'll be okay, Mom," her 16-year-old shoulders carrying a maturity beyond her years. She squeezed Rebecca's hand before preparing breakfast for her siblings. Noah bounded into the kitchen, 12 years old and buzzing with energy, despite the family's circumstances. "Can I use cardboard from the recycling for my school project?" "Of course, honey." 8-year-old Lily appeared last, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. "Did you find a new job yet?" Her voice small, sensing the tension. "Not yet, sweetie, but I will." 2 weeks passed in a blur of rejection. Rebecca's resume, once impressive, now joined hundreds of others in hiring managers' inboxes. The economy was recovering, according to news reports, but recovery hadn't reached Pine Ridge Apartments Building C. The eviction notice appeared the day after her severance ran out. 3 days to vacate. Rebecca sold what she could: furniture, electronics, clothes. She kept only what fit in their aging sedan clothes, important documents, and precious mementos. Olivia silently packed one small bag, her face stoic but eyes red-rimmed. Noah treated it like an adventure, while Lily cried when they left her bed behind. "Where will we go?" Olivia asked as they drove away from the apartment building. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with determination. "My grandmother owned a little place in the countryside near Pine Creek. It's probably long gone, but the area has camping grounds. We can stay there while I figure things out." The final indignity came during their departure. Richard Hawthorne Jr., son of the real estate tycoon who owned half the properties in town, arrived to personally inspect the apartment. His tailored suit and manicured nails a stark contrast to Rebecca's worn jeans and secondhand blouse. Some people just don't understand financial responsibility. His eyes swept dismissively over her children as he spoke into his Bluetooth earpiece. "Make sure it's cleaned properly before the new tenants arrive," as if their lives could be erased with a fresh coat of paint. The countryside grew more remote as they drove cell service, fading with each passing mile. The old sedan purchased during happier times struggled up hills and around curves. When the rain began, gentle at first, then building to a torrent, Rebecca leaned forward as if her body could will the wipers to work harder. They needed to reach the campground before dark. Then the engine light flickered on the dashboard. No, not now. The car sputtered once, twice, then died completely on a deserted stretch of rural highway. Rebecca managed to pull onto a dirt road before the engine gave its final gasp. Perfect timing. She popped the hood, releasing a cloud of steam that mingled with the falling rain. Mechanical knowledge wasn't in her skill set, and the nearest town was miles away. No signal on her phone. The children watched from inside the car, Olivia trying to entertain her siblings with stories, though her worried glances toward her mother betrayed her calm facade. "Mom, there's a path over there." Noah pointed to a narrow trail disappearing into the woods. "Maybe it leads to a house where we can call for help." Olivia suggested, practical as always. With no better options, Rebecca nodded. "Stay together." Lily held Noah's hand. The path wound through dense trees for nearly a mile before opening into a small clearing. There, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood the cabin. Its windows were clouded with grime wooden steps sagging beneath a small porch. The roof appeared intact, with no obvious holes or structural damage. A strange light seemed to flicker from within, though it wasn't electric, more like the reflection of fading daylight on glass. Rebecca approached cautiously, the children trailing behind. Lily suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on an upstairs window. The little girl's head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. "She's waiting for us," Lily whispered. "Who is Rebecca?" asked, but her daughter simply pointed at the cabin with absolute certainty. "The lady. She wants us to come home." "Mom, we can't just break in," Olivia whispered as Rebecca tested the door handle. "We're not breaking in. We're seeking shelter in an emergency." Rebecca responded, her hand trembling slightly. "We'll find the owner tomorrow and explain." To her surprise, the door swung open with a haunting creak, as if welcoming them inside. Inside, dust motes danced in beams of light, filtering through dirty windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall opposite a small kitchen area with an ancient wood stove. A wooden table with 3 chairs stood in the center. A narrow staircase led to what Rebecca assumed was a loft area. "It's like a fairy tale house," Lily whispered. "It's probably full of spiders." Noah countered, eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. Rebecca ran a finger along the dusty mantel. "It hasn't been lived in for years, but the structure seems sound." The family spent the remaining daylight clearing cobwebs and sweeping decades of dust from the wooden floor. Rebecca found old blankets in a cedar chest that, once shaken vigorously outside, would serve as bedding. Remarkably, the kitchen cupboards contained canned goods with labels faded but dates still within reason. A hand pump in the kitchen produced rusty water at first, then cleared to a steady, clean flow. "It's like someone prepared for us," Olivia remarked with a mixture of relief and suspicion. As night fell, the family huddled together on the floor before the fireplace, using jackets as pillows. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's events. Rebecca remained awake, watching shadows dance across their faces. She'd kept her fears at bay for their sake, but alone with her thoughts, the gravity of their situation pressed down. Jobless, homeless, 3 children depending on her strength. Morning light streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. Rebecca woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings before yesterday's events flooded back. Her children still slept, huddled together on the wooden floor. Lily sat awake cross-legged, having a whispered conversation with an empty chair beside her. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Rebecca asked softly. "The lady who lives here," Lily responded matter-of-factly. "She's happy we fixed her house. She says there's more cleaning to do, but we can stay." Rebecca exchanged a worried glance with Olivia, who had awakened during the exchange. "Just her imagination," the mother mouthed silently, though something about the conviction in Lily's voice sent a shiver down her spine. The cabin did have an occupied feeling despite its abandonment, as if someone had merely stepped out and would return at any moment. After a breakfast of canned peaches and stale crackers discovered in the pantry, the family continued exploring their temporary shelter. Noah discovered an old generator behind the cabin, excitement bubbling over. "Dad taught me about these." He began examining it with surprising confidence for a 12-year-old. Olivia found a collection of books in a small, built-in bookcase. Classics, local history, and surprisingly modern novels from just 5 years ago. Rebecca ventured upstairs, where she found 2 small bedrooms. One contained a simple metal frame bed, the other empty save for a rocking chair by the window. Both were immaculately clean despite the dust everywhere else, as if someone had maintained just these spaces. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph of an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair, standing proudly in front of the cabin. Something about her seemed familiar, though Rebecca couldn't place the connection. The day progressed with small discoveries. A root cellar accessed from outside yielded preserved vegetables and fruit. Noah managed to get the generator running for a few minutes before it sputtered out, but promised he could fix it with some time. Lily wandered the property, collecting wildflowers and having animated conversations with her invisible friend. Rebecca watched her youngest with growing concern, wondering if the stress of their situation was manifesting in an imaginary companion. That evening, Rebecca gathered the children around the wooden table now cleaned and set with mismatched dishes found in the cupboards. I need to be honest with you all. We're in a difficult situation. She explained they would stay at the cabin until she could contact the owner or find another solution. She had enough cash for a few days of supplies once they got the car running. Olivia nodded stoically while Noah interrupted with questions about fixing the generator. Lily simply smiled. The lady says we can stay as long as we need. She says we're family. As darkness fell, a strange sight caught Rebecca's attention. An antique chess set had appeared on a small side table. She was certain it hadn't been there earlier. The pieces were arranged mid-game as if waiting for the next move. When she mentioned it, Noah insisted neither he nor his sisters had touched it. Rebecca's rational mind suggested she had simply overlooked it during their cleaning, but a nagging feeling of unease persisted. That night, Rebecca dreamed of the silver-haired woman from the photograph. They sat together at the chessboard, though no words were exchanged. The woman moved pieces with deliberate care, occasionally glancing up with a sad smile. When Rebecca awoke before dawn, heart-pounding, she found herself drawn to the chess set. In the dim light of early morning, she could swear the pieces had moved. Noah's voice startled her from her thoughts. Listen to this. He knelt on the floor, knocking on wooden planks near the fireplace. It sounds hollow underneath, like there's a space. Rebecca joined him, and sure enough, a distinct emptiness echoed back from their knocks. It took nearly an hour of careful examination before Olivia discovered a notch in the floorboard that, when pressed, released a hidden mechanism. The section of floor lifted to reveal a small compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound trunk, its brass fittings tarnished, but intact. A heavy padlock secured its contents. Rebecca lifted it carefully, setting it on the wooden table as the children gathered around with wide eyes. It was locked as expected. Noah immediately began searching the cabin for a key while Olivia examined the lock. Lily simply watched, head tilted, before walking directly to the photograph of the silver-haired woman. The key is behind her picture, she announced with absolute certainty. Rebecca removed the frame from the wall, and sure enough, taped to the back was a small brass key. The coincidence sent another shiver through her. How did you know that, Lily? The little girl shrugged. The lady told me. She says the trunk has all her stories inside. Rebecca hesitated, the key hovering near the lock. These weren't their possessions to examine. Yet something pulled at her. A strange familiarity she couldn't explain. The lock opened with a soft click. Inside the trunk contained neatly organized documents, personal letters, legal papers, newspaper clippings, and most prominently a leather-bound journal with Eleanor Sullivan embossed on the cover. Rebecca lifted the journal reverently, feeling like an intruder, yet undeniably drawn to it. When she opened to the first page, a photograph slipped out. The same silver-haired woman, but decades younger, standing with another young woman who looked startlingly like Rebecca herself. Olivia gasped. Mom, that looks like Grandma Jean. Rebecca nodded slowly, recognition dawning. Her grandmother, who had died when Rebecca was just a teenager, stood smiling beside the cabin's apparent owner. The inscription on the back read, Eleanor and Jean Pine Creek, 1965. Rebecca's mind raced. Her grandmother had mentioned a family cabin, but Rebecca had assumed it was long gone, sold, or reclaimed by the forest. Could this be the same place the journal entries began in 1960, chronicling Eleanor Sullivan's life in the cabin? She wrote of the surrounding forest, her herb garden, and occasional visits from her niece Jean, Rebecca's grandmother. References to Pine Creek's richest man appeared frequently, growing darker in tone over the years. Rebecca skimmed ahead to 1976, where the entries became increasingly distressed. Richard Hawthorne visited again today. His offers grow more insistent, his threats less veiled. He wants this land for his timber operation, claims it should have been his father's all along. I've shown him the deed, the survey maps, all proving the Sullivan claim dating to 1887. He laughed and said papers can be changed. Rebecca's breath caught. Hawthorne. The same family name as her eviction notice, the same corporation as the real estate empire now dominating their town. The same man whose son had looked at her with such contempt as she packed her children's belongings. Deeper in the trunk, she found property deeds, surveys, and legal correspondence, all confirming Eleanor Sullivan's ownership of not just the cabin, but nearly 40 acres surrounding it. The final journal entry, dated October 1978, sent chills through Rebecca's body. Hawthorne's men came again, this time with papers they claim prove his ownership. When I refused to sign, he mentioned Jean and her young daughter. Accidents happen, he said. I can fight for myself, but I cannot risk my family. Tomorrow I will go to Pine Ridge to speak with Sheriff Davis, though he and Hawthorne have always been thick as thieves. If anything happens to me, may whoever finds this journal know the truth. Eleanor Sullivan have never sold this land, never signed it away. It belongs to my family, to Jean's children, to their children, after them. Hawthorne is a thief who preys on those weaker than himself. But even the strongest predator eventually meets its match. There were no more entries after that date. Rebecca closed the journal, her mind spinning with implications. Eleanor had disappeared, the cabin abandoned for decades, yet somehow preserved as if waiting. And now, through a series of desperate circumstances, Rebecca and her children had found their way here, to property that might legally belong to them. That night, Rebecca dreamed again of Eleanor Sullivan. This time they stood in the clearing outside the cabin. Eleanor pointed to an ancient oak tree at the property's edge, her lips moving without sound. Behind her, a shadow grew, taking the shape of a man in a business suit. Eleanor's expression changed to fear, then resolve. She pressed something into Rebecca's hand, a key different from the trunk key, before the shadow engulfed her completely. Rebecca awoke, clutching her pillow, heart hammering. Remember, a voice seemed to whisper in the darkness. Remember and reclaim. The next morning, Rebecca decided they needed supplies and information. The car wouldn't start, so walking to town was their only option. According to an old map found in the trunk, Pine Creek was about 3 miles away. We'll all go, she announced over their meager breakfast. I need to find out who legally owns this cabin now, and we need groceries. Olivia packed a small bag with the journal and key documents, while Noah ensured the cabin was secure. Lily seemed reluctant to leave, whispering promises to return to her invisible friend. The forest path eventually widened into a dirt road which led to a paved county highway. They had walked nearly 2 miles when an old pickup truck slowed beside them. The elderly woman driving peered at them with curious eyes beneath a wide-brimmed gardening hat. Need a lift into town? Not many folks walk these days, especially with little ones. Rebecca hesitated, her protective instincts warring with practical need. Before she could decide, Lily stepped forward. You're Martha. You know the lady in the cabin. The elderly woman's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her face paling slightly. What did you say, child? About a lady? Lily nodded confidently. The lady with silver hair. Eleanor. She says you bring her flowers every spring. Martha Hamilton stared at the little girl, then at Rebecca with her 2 older children. Without another word, she reached across and opened the passenger door. I think you folks better come with me. We have some talking to do. Martha's general store sat at the edge of Pine Creek, a weathered building with a front porch lined with rocking chairs and planters overflowing with herbs. Inside, the shelves carried everything from canned goods to handmade soaps, local honey to fishing tackle. A bell jingled as they entered, and Martha flipped the sign to close despite the morning hour. Tea first, she announced, gesturing toward a small sitting area near the wood stove. Then we'll talk about Eleanor Sullivan and why you're living in her cabin. Rebecca started to explain about the car breaking down the storm, their desperate situation, but Martha waved away her words. Fate has its reasons. I want to know how your little one knows about Eleanor bringing flowers. While Martha prepared tea in the back room, Rebecca whispered to Lily, How did you know her name or about the flowers? The 8-year-old shrugged. The lady told me. She says Martha is her friend who took care of her garden after she had to go away. Rebecca exchanged concerned glances with Olivia. Her oldest looked skeptical, but remained silent. Martha returned with a tray of steaming mugs and a plate of homemade cookies. Once everyone was settled, she fixed Rebecca with a penetrating gaze. Now then, you found Eleanor's cabin and somehow your little girl knows things she shouldn't. The older woman's eyes softened. I've been tending Eleanor's herb garden for 40 years. Though most folks think I'm just a sentimental old fool, nobody's lived in that cabin since 1978. She paused, studying Rebecca's face. You look like her, you know. Like Jean. You must be her granddaughter. Rebecca nodded, surprised. You knew my grandmother. Martha smiled sadly. Jean was Eleanor's niece, used to visit every summer until she married and moved away. Eleanor doted on her, taught her about the herbs and forest. When Rebecca confirmed her identity, Martha's posture changed, relaxing slightly. Well then, that explains how you found the cabin. Jean must have told you about it. Not exactly, Rebecca admitted. She mentioned it once or twice, but I never knew where it was. Our car broke down in the storm, and we found the path. Martha nodded as if this confirmed something. And the cabin was unlocked, I suppose. The door opened right up for you. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't ordinary, but Rebecca simply nodded. Martha sighed deeply, her age showing in the lines of her face. Eleanor disappeared in '78. Nobody knows what happened, though. Plenty suspected. She stood against Richard Hawthorne when he was buying up half the county for timber and development, refused to sell her land. The official story is she took the money and moved to Florida, but Martha shook her head. Eleanor would never sell that land. It had been in her family since the first settlers, and she certainly wouldn't have abandoned it without saying goodbye. The bell above the door jingled, interrupting her story. A tall man in his late 30s entered, briefcase in hand, surprise registering on his face at finding the store closed. Sorry, Martha, didn't see the sign. The elderly woman waved him over. Perfect timing, Michael. We were just discussing Eleanor Sullivan's property. Rebecca, this is Michael Bennett. He's our local attorney, though he does bigger cases in Portland, too. Michael, meet Rebecca Anderson, Jean Sullivan's granddaughter. Michael Bennett had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a firm handshake. He settled into a chair with the comfortable familiarity of a regular visitor. Martha mentioned you were looking into the old Hawthorne land deals, Rebecca asked, watching his expression carefully. The attorney nodded, his interest visibly piqued. Among other things, there's been some irregularities in the county records. Properties that changed hands under suspicious circumstances, particularly in the 1970s. Rebecca hesitated, then made a decision. She opened her bag and removed Eleanor's journal, sliding it across the table. I found this in my great-aunt's cabin, along with property deeds and survey maps dating to 1887. Michael's eyebrows rose as he gently opened the journal, scanning its pages with growing interest. When he reached the final entry, his expression darkened. This matches patterns I've been seeing in other cases. Hawthorne Enterprises used intimidation, forgery, even outright threats to acquire properties for timber harvesting and later development. His eyes met Rebecca's. But this is the first-hand account I've found. Most victims were too afraid to document the threats. This journal could be crucial evidence. Martha made a small, distressed sound. Evidence for what? Michael closed the journal carefully. A class-action lawsuit I've been building. Richard Hawthorne Sr. may be Pine Creek's most powerful resident, but I've identified at least 7 families who lost land under suspicious circumstances. With Eleanor's journal and these documents, he gestured to the papers Rebecca had spread on the table. We might finally have enough to move forward. Rebecca felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by reality. That's all very interesting, but I have more immediate problems. My family is essentially homeless. My car is broken down and I need to find work. Michael nodded, acknowledging her priorities. Let's start with the car. I'm no mechanic, but I know someone who is. As for the cabin, if these documents are legitimate, and I have no reason to doubt they are, you may have legal claim to it as Eleanor's great-niece and Jean's descendant. Martha stood suddenly, her chair scraping the wooden floor. Stay here. I have something to show you. She disappeared into the back room, returning moments later with a dusty folder. These are copies of Eleanor's will and family tree. She left everything to Jean with the stipulation it would pass to her descendants if Jean predeceased her. Martha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Eleanor made me promise to keep these safe to watch for Jean's family to return. I've been waiting 40 years. Rebecca stared at the documents, emotions conflicting within her. If what Martha said was true, the cabin and land legally belonged to her family. Yet someone, Hawthorne Enterprises presumably, had falsified records to claim ownership. The implications were overwhelming. What happens now? She asked, looking between Martha and Michael. The attorney gathered the documents carefully. With your permission, I'd like to review everything and compare it against county records. If I'm right, Hawthorne has been maintaining ownership through fraudulent means. The timber rights alone could be worth a small fortune, not to mention the land value. His eyes met Rebecca's directly. This won't be an easy fight. Richard Hawthorne Sr. essentially owns this town. His son, Richard Jr., runs their real estate division, the same one that likely evicted you. A chill ran through Rebecca at the connection. The man who had looked at her with such contempt during her eviction was part of the same family that had threatened Eleanor decades ago. Before she could respond, the store's phone rang. Martha answered, her expression changing to concern as she listened. She covered the mouthpiece, turning to Michael. "It's Ben from the garage. Says there's a black SUV with Hawthorne Company logos asking about an Anderson family and a broken-down sedan." Michael stood immediately, his posture tense. "They're already looking for you." "How would they know?" Rebecca asked, gathering her children closer instinctively. The attorney's expression was grim. "Small town, word travels. Someone must have reported the abandoned car and they put it together. We need to get you back to the cabin now, secure the documents, and develop a strategy." The drive back to the cabin in Martha's truck was tense. Michael followed in his own vehicle, making calls to his office about the documents. Noah peppered Martha with questions about Eleanor and the cabin's history, while Olivia remained thoughtfully silent. Lily hummed contentedly, seemingly unconcerned with the adults' worries. "She says we're doing the right thing," the little girl announced suddenly. "The lady, she says the bad man can't win this time." Martha parked at the forest's edge, the cabin still a short walk through the trees. As they approached, Rebecca noticed something odd, smoke curling from the chimney. "I didn't leave a fire burning," she whispered. Michael motioned for everyone to stay back while he investigated, but Lily broke free, running toward the cabin with absolute confidence. "Lily, wait," Rebecca called, hurrying after her daughter. The cabin door stood open. Inside, a fire crackled in the fireplace, though no one was visible. On the wooden table sat a freshly brewed pot of tea with 5 cups arranged in a perfect circle. Michael entered cautiously behind them, confusion evident. "Did someone break in?" Rebecca shook her head, a strange calm settling over her, despite the impossibility of the scene. "No, I think we were expected." Martha entered last, her eyes widening at the tea service. "That's Eleanor's favorite pot." Her voice trembled slightly. "And those cups, I packed them away myself after she disappeared." Rebecca moved toward the chess table, where the pieces had definitely changed position since morning. A white queen now stood prominently in the center, surrounded by black pieces, yet somehow unthreatened. Michael examined the room with professional thoroughness. No signs of forced entry, nothing disturbed except for these theatrical touches. His skepticism was clear, though he kept his voice respectful. "Someone is playing games." Martha shook her head firmly. "Or someone is sending a message." Eleanor always did have a flair for the dramatic. While the adults discussed possibilities, Noah called from the kitchen. His voice carried an unusual edge of excitement. "Mom, you need to see this." Rebecca joined him to find a floorboard pulled loose beside the sink, revealing another hidden compartment. Inside lay a metal lockbox, its surface free from the dust that covered everything else. The same key that opened the trunk fit perfectly into this lock as well. The box contained survey maps marked with Eleanor's neat handwriting. X marks indicated specific locations throughout the property, with cryptic notes beside each. Boundary stake, 1887. Sullivan Spring Claim, Original Homestead Foundation. Most intriguing was a folded paper titled Hawthorne Falsified Boundary, with detailed notes about surveyor bribes and document alterations. Michael spread the maps across the table, professional interest overriding his skepticism. This could be the smoking gun, evidence of deliberate fraud in property boundaries. His finger traced a line marked True Sullivan Boundary that encompassed nearly twice the land of the area marked Hawthorne Claimed Line. If these markers still exist physically on the property, we have concrete proof of boundary tampering. Rebecca felt a strange certainty growing within her. "We need to find these markers, prove the boundaries." Michael nodded, already thinking like a lawyer. "And document everything: photographs, GPS coordinates, witness statements. Martha can verify the original property lines. We build the case methodically, then file when we're ready, not before." Noah examined the map with the intensity only a 12-year-old boy could bring to a treasure hunt. "This is like those geocache games Dad used to do with us. We can find all these markers." His enthusiasm lightened the mood momentarily, though Rebecca noticed Olivia remained reserved, practical concerns clearly weighing on her young shoulders. As darkness approached, Martha prepared to leave, promising to return tomorrow with groceries and news from town. Michael lingered, reluctant to leave the family alone after the mysterious tea incident. I can stay in my car down by the road just to keep watch. Rebecca appreciated his concern but declined. We'll be fine. Whatever's happening here. She glanced at Lily, who was again whispering to an empty rocking chair. I don't think we're in danger from Eleanor's ghost. After the visitors departed, Rebecca sat with her children around the fireplace. The day's discoveries hung heavy in the air. Olivia finally voiced what they all were thinking. So this cabin might actually belong to us, and some rich guy stole it from Great Aunt Eleanor. Rebecca nodded, attempting to explain the situation in terms they could understand without causing undue worry. It's complicated, but yes, Mr. Bennett thinks we have a legal claim to this property. Noah's eyes gleamed with adventure. So we're like fighting for our ancestral home against an evil land baron. That's awesome. Rebecca couldn't help but smile at his framing, though she tempered his enthusiasm. It's not a movie, Noah. These are powerful people who won't be happy if we challenge them. Olivia, ever the pragmatist, cut to practical concerns. Even if we own the cabin, we still need money. You still need a job, Mom. The truth of her daughter's words settled heavily. Owning a cabin in the woods, if they could even prove their claim, wouldn't pay bills or buy groceries. Rebecca's severance was gone, her savings depleted. The legal battle Michael described could take months or even years. Lily, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. The lady says there's money too, in the place where the sun touches the rock fence on the longest day. Rebecca exchanged concerned glances with Olivia. Lily's lady had been right about the key and the tea, but this sounded like a fairy tale. The 8-year-old continued with absolute conviction. She couldn't give it to her family because the bad man was watching. So she hid it where only family would know to look. Later, after the children had gone to sleep upstairs, Olivia and Lily sharing the bed, Noah on a makeshift pallet in the empty room, Rebecca sat alone by the fire. Eleanor's journal open in her lap. She reread entries from summers when her grandmother Jean had visited, finding mentions of a special place where they watched the sunset on summer solstice. A rock fence built by Eleanor's grandfather marked the western property boundary, creating what Eleanor called nature's calendar. Rebecca closed her eyes at exhaustion washing over her. Just days ago, her biggest worry had been making rent. Now she sat in a possibly haunted cabin, communing with a great aunt she'd never met, preparing to battle one of the most powerful families in Oregon. The absurdity might have made her laugh if the stakes weren't so high. A soft creak drew her attention to the rocking chair, which moved slightly as if recently vacated. On its seat lay a newspaper clipping she was certain hadn't been there before. Dated July 1978, the headline read, Hawthorne Enterprises expands local business, man acquires Sullivan Timber Tract. The article described how Eleanor Sullivan had decided to retire to Florida after selling her family property to forward-thinking businessman Richard Hawthorne. A quote attributed to Hawthorne praised Eleanor's sensible decision to allow progress in our growing community. Rebecca's hands trembled as she set the clipping aside. The lies were there in black and white. The official narrative that had allowed Hawthorne to steal Eleanor's land and erase her resistance. But why had Eleanor never returned to fight what had happened after that final journal entry? That night, Rebecca dreamed of Eleanor again. They stood together on the property, Eleanor pointing urgently toward the ancient oak tree mentioned in her journal. Remember, her silent lips seemed to say. Then the scene shifted, showing Eleanor confronting a younger Richard Hawthorne. Their angry exchange ended with Eleanor collapsing suddenly, Hawthorne watching with cold calculation rather than concern. The dream, Eleanor turned to Rebecca, eyes pleading. Justice sleeps but never dies. Rebecca awoke at dawn, heart pounding, the dream vivid in her mind. Outside the bedroom window, the oak tree from her dream stood silhouetted against the rising sun. Without waking the children, she pulled on a sweater and boots, drawn inexorably toward the massive tree. Its trunk was wider than her outstretched arms could encompass roots, creating natural terraces in the soil. As she circled it, a peculiar pattern in the bark caught her eye, not natural but carved. Initials within a heart, E.S. plus J.S. Eleanor and Jean, her great aunt and grandmother. Rebecca traced the carving with her fingers, feeling an unexpected connection to these women and this land. Something about the carving seemed odd. The heart was too perfectly shaped, too deeply cut to be a casual marking. She pressed against it, and to her astonishment, a small section of bark swung inward, like a tiny door revealing a hollow space within the trunk. Inside lay a metal container sealed against the elements. Rebecca's hands shook as she retrieved it, certain she was crossing some threshold from which there would be no return. The container held a sealed envelope, addressed in elegant script, "To Jean's descendants when they find their way home." Beneath it lay a smaller box that rattled when moved. Rebecca carried her discoveries back to the cabin, mind racing. As she reached the porch, a black SUV appeared on the dirt road leading to the property. Through the trees, she could make out the Hawthorne Enterprises logo on its side. Her heart rate spiked as she hurried inside, hiding the container and envelope beneath the loose floorboard in the kitchen. Just as she replaced the board, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Richard Hawthorne Jr. stood on her porch, his tailored suit as impeccable as it had been during her eviction. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes as he surveyed the cabin and Rebecca's disheveled appearance. "Ms. Anderson, what a surprise to find you here." His voice carried the practiced concern of a man accustomed to hiding his true intentions. "I understand your car broke down nearby. Our company owns this property, and we can't have squatters, even those in unfortunate circumstances." Rebecca stood straighter, something of Eleanor's resolve flowing through her veins. "Actually, Mr. Hawthorne, I have reason to believe this property belongs to my family. My great-aunt was Eleanor Sullivan." His expression shifted momentarily, surprise and calculation. "Eleanor Sullivan sold this land to my father in 1978. It's been in Hawthorne Holdings ever since. If you have personal items to collect, I can allow that courtesy. But you and your children need to vacate immediately." From upstairs came the sound of movement, the children awakening. Rebecca held her ground, blocking the doorway. "I've found documentation suggesting the sale was fraudulent, Mr. Hawthorne. My attorney is reviewing it now." Hawthorne's pleasant facade hardened. "I strongly advise against pursuing baseless claims, Ms. Anderson. Legal battles are expensive, and you're clearly in no position to engage in one." His gaze swept dismissively over her worn clothes, the cabin's modest interior. "My father is a generous man. I'm authorized to offer you $5,000 to relinquish any perceived claim and leave quietly." The amount, substantial to Rebecca in her current financial state, hung in the air between them. She could take the money, find a small apartment, survive until she secured another job. The practical choice, the safe choice. Olivia appeared at the top of the stairs, watching the exchange with worried eyes. Rebecca thought of Eleanor's journal, of Martha's 40-year vigil, of Lily's conversations with the lady who had guided them here. "Some things are worth more than money, Mr. Hawthorne. My family has a legal claim to this property, and we intend to pursue it." The man's expression hardened, all pretense of civility evaporating. "You're making a serious mistake. My father built this town. We employ half its residents. No local attorney will touch your case," his voice lowered to a threatening whisper. "And accidents happen in these woods. Hikers get lost. Cabins catch fire. Think of your children, Ms. Anderson." As if summoned by his words, Lily appeared beside her sister, her small face solemn as she studied the visitor. "You're the bad man's son," she stated simply. "The one who took the lady's house." Hawthorne stared at the child, momentarily disconcerted by her direct assessment. Rebecca placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I believe we're done here, Mr. Hawthorne. Please leave my property." He retreated to his vehicle, making a phone call as soon as he was inside. Through the cabin windows, Rebecca watched him gesturing angrily, his face flushed with indignation. When the SUV finally pulled away, she released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Mom Noah's voice came from behind her. "That was him, wasn't it? The guy who kicked us out of our apartment. The same family who hurt Great-Aunt Eleanor." Rebecca nodded, drawing her children close. "The Hawthornes have controlled this town for decades, but they've never faced our family before." Olivia, practical as always, voiced her concern. "He threatened us, Mom. They could hurt us." Rebecca met her daughter's eyes steadily. "That's why we need to be smart and careful. But we're not running anymore. This is our home. We're going to fight for it." As the morning progressed, Rebecca retrieved the hidden container from beneath the floorboard. The children gathered around as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside, Eleanor's handwriting filled several pages dated October 15, 1978, 3 days after her final journal entry. The letter began, "To Jean's children or grandchildren who have found their way back to Sullivan Land. If you are reading this, I am gone, taken silenced or worse. Richard Hawthorne threatened your grandmother's life and yours if I did not sign over the property. But what he received was a forgery, and the real deeds remain with our family lawyer in Portland. The letter continued detailing Eleanor's plan to expose Hawthorne's criminal activities. Not just the land grab, but illegal timber harvesting, environmental violations, and bribery of local officials. She had compiled evidence, but needed to get it to federal authorities beyond Hawthorne's influence. The small box contained a key to a safe deposit box in Portland and detailed banking information. Most shocking was Eleanor's final confession. I fear Hawthorne will make good on his threats. If I disappear, do not believe I left willingly. Look to the North Ridge where the three pines stand together. There you will find the truth of what happened to me and the evidence that will bring down a tyrant. The cabin fell silent as Rebecca finished reading. Even Noah, usually bursting with questions, sat stunned by the implications. Olivia was the first to speak, her voice thick with emotion. She knew she might die, but she still fought. Rebecca nodded, a newfound determination settling over her. And now we'll finish what she started. The newspaper clipping Rebecca had found by the rocking chair now made terrible sense. Not just a fraudulent account of a property sale, but possibly a cover story for something far worse. Eleanor hadn't fled to Florida. She had disappeared under suspicious circumstances with Hawthorne, the likely culprit. The realization sent ice through Rebecca's veins. They weren't just fighting for property rights. They were potentially uncovering a 40-year-old crime. A knock at the door startled them all. Rebecca approached, cautiously relieved to see Michael Bennett's face through the window. He entered with purpose, carrying his briefcase and a look of controlled excitement. I've been reviewing the documents all night. The attorney spread papers across the table, pointing to specific paragraphs and signatures. The deed Hawthorne filed with the county in 1978 has inconsistencies with Eleanor's known signature. The survey boundaries were altered, and most damning, the notary who supposedly witnessed the transaction, his license had expired 2 years earlier. Rebecca shared Eleanor's letter, watching Michael's expression shift from professional interest to personal investment as he read. This changes everything. He looked up, meeting Rebecca's eyes with newfound intensity. This isn't just a property dispute. It's potentially a homicide investigation. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder. As Michael outlined potential legal strategies, a truck pulled up outside. Martha emerged carrying grocery bags, followed by a heavy-set man in mechanic's overalls. That's Ben, Michael explained. Best mechanic in 3 counties. He's going to look at your car. Martha bustled in, her face grave as she unpacked supplies. News travels fast in Pine Creek. Richard Hawthorne Jr. was at the diner this morning, asking questions about you all. When I mentioned you might be staying a while, his face turned 3 shades of red. The mechanic reported the car needed significant work, but could be repaired within a week. The cost, however, would be substantial. Money Rebecca simply didn't have. Before she could worry further, Martha waved away her concerns. Eleanor's account at my store never closed. Consider it covered. When Rebecca protested, the older woman fixed her with a stern look. I've been waiting 40 years to help Eleanor's family. Let me do this. As the day progressed, plans took shape. Michael would file initial paperwork questioning the property transferor while quietly contacting the state attorney general about reopening the investigation into Eleanor's disappearance. Martha would spread word among trusted townspeople about Rebecca's claim, building local support. The children would help search for the boundary markers indicated on Eleanor's maps, documenting evidence of the original property lines. That evening, as sunset painted the cabin in golden light, Rebecca stood on the porch watching her children explore their newfound legacy. Noah mapped the property with boyish enthusiasm, marking potential locations of boundary stakes on a hand-drawn chart. Olivia helped Martha harvest herbs from the overgrown garden, listening intently to stories about Eleanor's remedies and recipes. Lily sat beneath the ancient oak, conversing quietly with her invisible friend, occasionally looking up to wave at her mother with absolute contentment. For the first time since losing her job, Rebecca felt something like peace. They had lost nearly everything, driven to the edge of desperation, only to discover a legacy, a purpose, and perhaps even a home. The path ahead would be difficult, possibly dangerous. Richard Hawthorne Sr. would fight viciously to protect his empire and secrets. But standing on Eleanor Sullivan's porch, watching the sun set over what might truly be her family's land, Rebecca made a silent promise to the great aunt she'd never met. Justice sleeps but never dies. The chessboard inside had moved again. The White Queen now stood poised for checkmate, surrounded but undefeated. The battle for Sullivan Land, for Eleanor's justice, had begun. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the trees as Rebecca and Michael trekked along the overgrown path toward the first boundary marker. Eleanor's hand-drawn map crinkled in Rebecca's grip, weathered edges softened by decades of storage. They had risen before dawn, leaving the children under Martha's watchful eye at the cabin. The first marker, supposedly a stone cairn built by Eleanor's grandfather, should stand near where the property met Pine Creek itself. 3 days had passed since Richard Hawthorne Jr.'s threatening visit. 3 days of planning, documenting, and building their case. Michael carried a professional camera, a GPS device, and a legal notepad, tools for modern justice. Rebecca clutched Eleanor's journal, a connection to the woman whose battle she now continued. The attorney had insisted on accompanying her, concerned after Hawthorne's thinly veiled threats. His presence brought comfort, though Rebecca would never admit how her heart raced each time branches cracked in the forest behind them. The creek announced itself with gentle burbling before coming into view, clear water tumbling over smooth stones. Michael consulted the GPS, then the map. According to Eleanor's notes, the marker should be just northeast of the largest bend. They separated, scanning the underbrush for anything man-made among nature's chaos. Michael's triumphant whistle drew Rebecca to a pile of stones deliberately arranged and topped with one bearing a crude carving, JS 1887. Joseph Sullivan, Eleanor's grandfather. The cairn stood exactly where the map indicated, validation that sent a rush of vindication through Rebecca's chest. Michael photographed it from every angle, recording the GPS coordinates and making detailed notes about its condition and location. Physical proof of the original survey boundaries. One small victory in what promised to be a lengthy battle. By mid-morning, they had located 3 more markers, each one strengthening their legal position. The last, a distinctive notch cut into a boundary oak, clearly showed where the property line should run, nearly half a mile beyond where Hawthorne's survey claimed it ended. "That's millions in timber value alone," Michael muttered, calculating mentally as he documented the discovery. Rebecca wasn't thinking about money. Each marker felt like touching history, her children's birthright. Their triumph faded as they returned to the main road and found a Pine Creek Sheriff's Department vehicle parked beside Michael's car. Sheriff Wade Lawson, a barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and mirrored sunglasses, leaned against his cruiser with calculated casualness. "Good morning, folks. Unusual spot for a hike." His tone suggested nothing friendly despite the greeting. Michael stepped forward, every inch the professional attorney despite his mud-spattered hiking clothes. "We're surveying private property. Sheriff, official business." Lawson's eyebrow arched above his sunglasses. "Hawthorne Enterprises filed a trespassing complaint this morning. Says you're on their timber reserve." Michael produced a folder from his backpack, extending copies of Eleanor's original deed and survey maps. "We have documentation suggesting otherwise. I've filed preliminary motions with the county clerk questioning the validity of Hawthorne's claim. Until that's resolved, my client has every right to be here." The sheriff barely glanced at the papers. "Listen, Bennett, I don't want trouble. Richard Hawthorne Sr. has been calling my office hourly. Says you're encouraging this lady to make fraudulent claims." He adjusted his gun belt, a subtle reminder of authority. "Folks around here remember Eleanor Sullivan. Nice old lady, but she sold out and moved to Florida. End of story." The casual dismissal of Eleanor's disappearance ignited something fierce in Rebecca's chest. If she sold the land and moved away, Sheriff, then where are the bank records showing she received payment? Why did she leave everything behind, including family heirlooms, and why hasn't anyone heard from her in 40 years? Her voice remained level despite the anger coursing through her veins. "Perhaps these are questions your department should have asked in 1978. Lawson's jaw tightened beneath his mustache. He removed his sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that assessed Rebecca with new interest. "Careful, ma'am. Throwing accusations about events before my time could be considered defamation, especially against respected citizens like the Hawthornes." He returned the sunglasses to his face, effectively hiding any emotion. "You folks have 48 hours to vacate Hawthorne property. After that, I'll have no choice but to enforce the law." Michael waited until the sheriff's cruiser disappeared around the bend before speaking. Wade Lawson has been sheriff for 12 years, ran unopposed the last 3 elections, received substantial campaign donations from Hawthorne Enterprises. The implication hung between them, needing no elaboration. Rebecca stared down the empty road, Eleanor's voice from the journal echoing in her mind. Sheriff Davis and Hawthorne have always been thick as thieves. 40 years later, nothing had changed. The children's excited voices greeted them as they approached the cabin. Noah ran down the path, waving a metal detector salvaged from the tool shed. Martha found this in Eleanor's storage. I've been searching around the oak tree. His enthusiasm faltered as he registered their serious expressions. Did something happen? Rebecca forced a reassuring smile, unwilling to burden him with adult concerns. Just a reminder that we have powerful opponents. What did you find with the metal detector? Noah led them to his discovery. A metal box buried beneath the oak tree's massive roots, similar to the one Rebecca had found days earlier, but larger and more weathered. Inside lay bundles of letters secured with faded ribbon photographs of the Sullivan family through generations, and at the bottom a leather portfolio containing legal documents. Rebecca spread them carefully across the porch steps while Michael examined each with growing excitement. These are the original survey documents from 1887 authenticated by the Oregon Territory Land Office. And this, he held up a yellowed paper reverently, is the mineral rights certificate separate from the land deed. Eleanor knew what she was doing. She divided the legal rights to the property, creating documentation that would be nearly impossible to forge completely. Some of these would have been filed with offices outside Hawthorne's sphere of influence. Martha brought lemonade, her expression troubled as she settled beside them. Richard Hawthorne Sr. came into the store this morning. First time in 20 years he's set foot in my shop. The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured the drinks. Asked about you all, trying to sound concerned. That poor Anderson family squatting in a dangerous old cabin? Someone should help them find proper accommodations. When I said you were doing just fine, he mentioned how tragic it would be if there was an accident. Old wiring catching fire, rotted floorboards giving way. Michael's expression hardened. He's escalating the threats, moving from implicit to explicit. We need to accelerate our timeline. He pulled out his phone, checking for signal before moving to higher ground near the road. I'm calling my contact at the state attorney general's office. We're beyond local jurisdiction now. While Michael made his calls, Rebecca examined Eleanor's letters. Most were correspondence with her niece Jean, spanning decades of family connection. Reading her grandmother's words, her humor, her wisdom, her love for Eleanor, brought an ache of connection across generations. The most recent letters described Jean's concerns about Richard Hawthorne's aggressive tactics, urging Eleanor to consider selling and moving closer to her family. Eleanor's responses remained resolute. Sullivan land stays with Sullivans. Some things matter more than money. A worn leather-bound book at the bottom of the box proved to be Eleanor's first journal, begun when she inherited the cabin in 19. The earliest entries described her decision to live alone in the family homestead, despite neighbors' concern about a spinster in the woods. I choose solitude, not isolation. There is a profound difference that few understand. Within these forest boundaries, I am more connected to what matters than anyone in their crowded towns with empty hearts. Evening approached as they continued examining the documents. Olivia brought sandwiches to the porch, her practical nature asserting itself amid the adults' absorption. Everyone needs to eat, even when uncovering family conspiracies. Her wry humor broke the tension, reminding Rebecca that amid this unfolding drama, she had 3 children witnessing her example. How she fought this battle would shape their understanding of justice, perseverance, and courage. Michael returned from his calls with mixed news. The Attorney General's office expressed interest, but needed more substantial evidence before intervening in what appeared to be a civil property dispute. Until they had proof of criminal misconduct by Hawthorne or the local authorities, state resources wouldn't be allocated. However, his paralegal in Portland had uncovered inconsistencies in the county records. The deed transferring Eleanor's property to Hawthorne Enterprises had been filed and backdated weeks after Eleanor's disappearance. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. The sheriff's 48-hour deadline loomed, yet leaving felt impossible now. This wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was her heritage, her children's birthright, and possibly the scene of a crime against Eleanor. The mystery of what happened at the North Ridge, where the 3 pines stand together, haunted her thoughts. Eleanor's letter suggested evidence waited there, perhaps even her remains. A soft tapping at her bedroom door revealed Lily in her nightgown, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The little girl climbed beside Rebecca without waiting for invitation. The lady is worried about you. Her innocent conviction hadn't wavered despite days passing. The lady says you need to look under the stone by the fireplace. There's something important there. Morning brought new determination. Rebecca examined the hearth's stone foundation until discovering one block that shifted slightly when pressed. Behind it lay a small cavity containing a metal flask, the kind hikers carry. Inside was not water, but a roll of film carefully sealed in wax paper. Michael recognized it immediately. 110 format, popular in the 70s. Small cameras, easy to conceal. We need to get this developed. Carefully. If Eleanor was documenting something Hawthorne wanted hidden, the implications hung in the air. Martha knew someone in Roseburg who still processed old film formats trustworthy and discreet. Michael would drive there immediately while Rebecca continued searching the property. They couldn't wait for the sheriff deadline to pass. Whatever evidence existed needed to be secured before Hawthorne found another way to erase it, and them. After Michael departed, Rebecca gathered the children for a council of war. Noah's fascination with spy movies provided unexpected insight into securing their discoveries. They created multiple copies of key documents, hiding them throughout the property and with trusted allies. Olivia suggested recording video testimonials from Martha and other elderly residents who remembered Eleanor, preserving their accounts in case pressure was applied to silence them. Lily's contribution proved most unsettling. The 8-year-old produced a detailed drawing of 3 pine trees on a hillside with an X marking the ground between them. When questioned about it, she shrugged with childish nonchalance. "The lady showed me in my dream. That's where she's waiting for us to find her." By mid-afternoon, Rebecca and Noah had mapped the most likely location of the North Ridge mentioned in Eleanor's letter. A steep wooded hillside rose about a mile from the cabin, its crest visible above the surrounding forest. Taking the metal detector and basic tools, they set out to investigate, leaving Olivia and Lily with Martha at the cabin. The climb proved challenging, thick underbrush giving way to rocky terrain as they ascended. Noah maintained a running commentary on wildlife and potential booby traps, his imagination transforming their expedition into an adventure rather than what it might actually be, a search for a murder victim. The 3 pine trees stood sentinel at the ridge's highest point, exactly as Eleanor had described and Lily had drawn. Ancient giants towering over their neighbors, planted in a perfect line that seemed too precise to be natural. Between them, the ground showed subtle disturbance, not recent but different from the surrounding forest floor. Less undergrowth soil that had settled unevenly. Noah's metal detector squealed near the center point, signaling something substantial beneath the surface. Rebecca hesitated, the full weight of what they might discover suddenly overwhelming. If Eleanor lay buried here, this became more than a property dispute. It transformed into a murder investigation with her family at its center. Noah sensed her reservation, his usual exuberance, tempered by understanding beyond his years. "We have to know the truth, Mom. Great-Aunt Eleanor would want us to find her." Their excavation revealed not human remains, but a metal ammunition box, military grade, and still intact despite decades underground. Inside, protected by layers of wax paper and plastic, lay a collection of items, a small tape recorder with cassettes still inside a notebook, filled with Eleanor's handwriting. Photographs showing men loading unmarked barrels onto trucks, in most damning. Documents with Hawthorne Enterprises letterhead detailing chemical waste disposal in watershed areas throughout the county. The notebook contained Eleanor's investigation notes. She had discovered Hawthorne using remote sections of forest, including portions of her land he claimed as his, to dump industrial chemicals from his manufacturing interests. The photographs showed workers' license plates, locations. The tape presumably contained recorded conversations. Eleanor had compiled enough evidence to bring criminal charges against Hawthorne Enterprises for environmental violations that would have devastated their timber and real estate operations. Noah stared at the documents with wide eyes. So Great-Aunt Eleanor was like an environmental spy, and Mr. Hawthorne killed her to cover it up. Rebecca carefully repacked the box, unwilling to confirm such a direct accusation despite the evidence pointing exactly that direction. Let's get this back to Michael before we draw conclusions. What matters is that Eleanor left us the truth, and now we can finish what she started. They were halfway down the ridge when Noah froze, grabbing Rebecca's arm. Through the trees below, two figures in Hawthorne Enterprises uniforms moved methodically through the forest, heading in their direction. Not close enough to have spotted them yet, but following what appeared to be a deliberate search pattern. Rebecca pulled Noah behind a large fallen tree, hearts pounding as the men continued their approach. "We need to find another way down." Rebecca's whisper barely carried to Noah's ears. If they're searching, they might have found the other boundary markers. The boy nodded, eyes wide, but remarkably calm. They crawled backward until terrain shielded them, then circled west, using the ridge to block them from view. The descent proved treacherous, steeper, less traversed, but ultimately successful. They emerged from the forest nearly a mile from where they'd entered the cabin, still a considerable hike away. As they approached from the unexpected direction, Rebecca spotted another Hawthorne vehicle parked near the cabin. Through the trees, she could see Richard Hawthorne Jr. on the porch speaking with Martha. No sign of her daughters. Instinct made her pull Noah into the underbrush, watching the interaction from concealment. Martha's posture radiated defiance despite Hawthorne's obviously persuasive gestures. The conversation ended with Hawthorne handing Martha an envelope before returning to his vehicle and departing. Rebecca waited until the dust from his SUV settled before emerging with Noah. Martha met them halfway to the cabin, her face lined with worry. "They're escalating, dear. Junior came with an offer. 25,000 cash for you to drop all claims and leave immediately." Her weathered hands clutched the envelope. "I told him I'm not your messenger, but he left it anyway." Inside, Olivia and Lily waited with wide eyes. Lily spoke first, her expression uncommonly serious. "The man with the fancy watch asked a lot of questions about what we found in the cabin. I didn't tell him anything, but he didn't believe me." Olivia provided more details. "He was super interested in any hidden compartments or secret documents. Kept saying how dangerous this old cabin is, how we'd be better off in a modern apartment that his company could arrange right away." The 16-year-old's perception cut through pretense. "He was scared, Mom, trying not to show it, but definitely worried about what we might have found." Rebecca placed the ammunition box on the table, sharing their discovery at the ridge. Martha's hands trembled as she examined the environmental evidence. "This explains everything." Eleanor was always passionate about protecting the land. Finding proof Hawthorne was poisoning it, poisoning people's water, she would have moved heaven and earth to stop him. The drone of an approaching vehicle interrupted their discussion. Not the smooth purr of Hawthorne's luxury SUV, but the rattle of Michael's older model sedan. The attorney burst through the door with barely a greeting, clutching an envelope of photographs. The film from the flask contained images taken by Eleanor in the weeks before her disappearance. Most showed the same environmental violations they discovered in the ammunition box, but three crucial frames documented a meeting between Richard Hawthorne Sr., Sheriff Davis, and a man identified in Eleanor's notes as a county judge. The pictures clearly showed money changing hands, not subtle negotiations, but outright bribes captured from Eleanor's hidden vantage point. Michael spread them across the table, connecting them with the new evidence from the ridge. "This is the motherlode: environmental crimes, judicial corruption, and possible homicide, all linked to Hawthorne. The statute of limitations has expired on the bribes, but not on toxic dumping of this magnitude, and certainly not on murder." Their celebration ended abruptly when Michael's phone rang. His paralegal in Portland voiced tight with urgency. Richard Hawthorne Sr. had personally visited the county records office that morning. Within hours, a mysterious fire broke out, destroying the section containing property deeds from the 1970s. Official story: electrical malfunction. Reality: the most blatant evidence tampering Michael had encountered in his career. He's getting desperate. Destroying records, increasing bribes, having his men search the property. Michael paced the cabin floor, legal mind calculating angles. "We need to move fast. His next step will be more direct, finding ways to discredit us or force us off the land before we can file everything." Rebecca thought of the men searching the forest, likely looking for the same evidence they just recovered. The 48-hour deadline from Sheriff Lawson loomed. Expired by morning. "How do we protect ourselves tonight?" The attorney's expression grew grim. "I'll stay. Martha should take the children to her place in town. Separate the family from the evidence as a precaution." Olivia immediately protested. "We're not leaving Mom alone." Noah backed his sister, unusual solidarity forming between the siblings. "Besides, we know all the hiding places now. We can help." Rebecca felt simultaneous pride in their courage and terror at their vulnerability. The decision crystallized with Lily's quiet observation. The lady says we need to stay together. She protected this place for our family, and now we protect it for her. As darkness fell, they implemented Noah's surprisingly sophisticated security measures. Tripwires of fishing line connected to cans near likely approaches to the cabin. The ammunition box and most crucial evidence were sealed in waterproof containers and hidden in the well, retrievable but safe from fire or casual search. Michael parked his car out of sight behind the cabin, eliminating the obvious sign of occupation from the main road. Rebecca settled the children upstairs but found sleep impossible. The chessboard in the corner drew her attention, pieces arranged in what Michael had identified as a famous strategic defense. The Sullivan defense he'd noted with appreciation. Appropriate. She moved a white pawn forward, continuing the game Eleanor had seemingly begun decades earlier. If the cabin truly held her great-aunt's presence, Rebecca wanted her to know they were committed to the fight. Near midnight, Noah's alarm system jangled, cans clattering at the forest's edge. Rebecca and Michael moved silently to the windows, peering into darkness, broken only by moonlight filtering through trees. 3 flashlight beams moved through the forest, converging on the cabin from different directions. Coordinated, professional. Not the haphazard approach of curious teenagers or random trespassers. Michael's whisper carried urgency without panic. Wake the kids. Gather only essentials. His legal mind had shifted to survival mode. We can't be sure who's out there or what they're planning. She moved swiftly to the stairs, heart pounding against her ribs. The children responded with remarkable composure. Even Lily, clutching her rabbit, followed instructions without question. They assembled in the kitchen as flashlight beams reached the clearing surrounding the cabin. The back door offered their best escape route, leading toward dense forest rather than the exposed main path. Michael checked the approach, then froze. A 4th flashlight beam cut across that exact route, blocking their planned exit. They're surrounding us. His voice remained controlled despite the dire assessment. 4 men coordinated approach. This isn't a legal eviction. Rebecca gathered her children, close mind racing through options. The well where they'd hidden the evidence stood about 30 feet from the back door. Exposed ground to cover, but their documentation needed protection more than they needed escape. The alternative was potential destruction of everything they'd discovered, everything Eleanor had died to preserve. She made a mother's most difficult calculation, weighing risk against necessity. I'll create a distraction. Get the children to Martha's. Rebecca pressed Eleanor's journal into Michael's hands. This and what's in the well are what matter most. Michael started to protest, but recognition dawned in his eyes. She was making the same choice Eleanor had, prioritizing justice over personal safety. The approaching footsteps grew louder, flashlight beams now illuminating the cabin's windows. Before they could implement the desperate plan, Lily slipped from Rebecca's grasp, moving to the front door with uncanny determination. The child unlocked it before anyone could react, throwing it wide. Rebecca lunged forward, expecting to pull her daughter from danger, but froze at the tableau revealed by moonlight. On the porch stood Richard Hawthorne Sr. himself, not the younger version from Rebecca's dreams, but a more withered, expensive version of the same arrogance. Behind him, 3 men in Hawthorne Enterprises security uniforms formed a phalanx flashlights, illuminating the cabin's interior. The unexpected confrontation created a moment of perfect stillness. Hawthorne clearly hadn't anticipated facing a child, nor the tableau of family unity behind her. Lily regarded the elderly businessman with unnerving directness, her 8-year-old voice carrying surprising authority. You hurt the lady. You buried her in the woods and stole her house. The simplicity of the accusation, delivered without adult hesitation or qualification, visibly startled the man. Rebecca moved forward, placing protective hands on Lily's shoulders while addressing the intruders. Trespassing at midnight seems beneath you, Mr. Hawthorne, or is intimidating women and children standard practice for your company? Her voice remained steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. Michael stood beside her attorney persona, firmly in place, despite the absurd hour and circumstances. I've documented this intrusion. 4 armed men surrounding a family home at midnight constitutes criminal intimidation, not legal enforcement. Hawthorne recovered his composure, adjusting gold cufflinks visible even in the dim light. Merely concerned about squatters in unsafe conditions, Mr. Bennett. Sheriff Lawson mentioned the deadline, but I thought a personal visit might resolve matters more. amicably. His smile never reached his eyes, cold calculation evident beneath paper-thin civility. I understand Ms. Anderson has children to consider. Their welfare should be her priority, not chasing frivolous claims. The implied threat hung in the night air. Rebecca matched his false smile with one of her own. Their welfare is precisely why we're staying. This property legally belongs to my family. Eleanor Sullivan was my grandmother's aunt, making me her legal heir. His expression flickered. Surprise or annoyance impossible to determine in the shadow porch. She continued, pressing the momentary advantage. We've discovered the original deed, unaltered survey markers, and Eleanor's documentation of what really happened in 1978. Your counterfeit paperwork won't stand up to proper examination. Hawthorne's carefully maintained facade cracked irritation bleeding through his practiced control. Eleanor Sullivan sold this worthless plot fair and square. The old woman was difficult, unreasonable about progress. Countless hours wasted negotiating when eminent domain would have been simpler. His security team shifted uncomfortably as their employer revealed more than intended. The deal closed. She took the money and left. End of story. Michael stepped forward, attorney's instincts recognizing the opening. Then you won't mind providing bank records showing that payment or explaining why the deed transfer was filed weeks after Eleanor disappeared. His voice carried the confidence of someone holding winning cards. We have proof of environmental crimes on this property, Mr. Hawthorne. Toxic dumping in the watershed. Photographs, documentation, evidence that establishes motive for silencing Eleanor permanently rather than merely buying her land. The businessman's face hardened into something ugly and authentic. Careful counselor, baseless accusations against a man of my standing have consequences. Small-town attorneys who overreach tend to experience unfortunate career trajectories. He gestured to his security team. Search the premises. Find whatever evidence they claim to have. His confidence suggested a man accustomed to problems disappearing on command. Rebecca felt Michael tense beside her, prepared to physically prevent the illegal search. The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge of potential violence when headlights swept the clearing. A Pine Creek Sheriff's Department cruiser pulled alongside the Hawthorne vehicles, followed by a second unmarked car. Sheriff Lawson emerged from the cruiser, adjusting his hat with deliberate slowness as he assessed the midnight standoff. Behind him, a woman in her 40s exited the unmarked car, her posture radiating authority despite civilian clothes. Quite a gathering for this time of night. Her voice cut through tension with professional crispness. Elizabeth Reeves, Oregon State Police, Special Investigations Unit. She surveyed the security team with pointed interest. Someone want to explain why armed men are surrounding a family home after midnight? Hawthorne recovered quickly, extending his hand with practiced charm. Richard Hawthorne, these folks are squatting on my company's property. Simply checking on their welfare after Sheriff Lawson expressed concerns about the structure's safety. The investigator ignored his outstretched hand, instead examining the security team's posture and equipment with professional assessment. Those look like standard-issue tactical flashlights. Unusual equipment for a welfare check. Sheriff Lawson stepped forward, discomfort evident beneath his official demeanor. Ms. Reeves received some concerning information. Asked me to accompany her to interview Ms. Anderson. His eyes darted between Hawthorne and the state investigator, a man caught between colliding forces. Didn't expect to find you here personally, Richard. The businessman's expression hardened. Local matter, Wade. Nothing requiring state involvement. The investigator cut him off with practiced efficiency. Actually, Mr. Hawthorne, allegations of environmental crimes, document falsification, and potential homicide investigation fall squarely within state jurisdiction. Her gaze swept the porch, landing on Michael. I received your documentation this afternoon, counselor. Compelling enough to warrant immediate follow-up. Rebecca felt a surge of hope as she realized what had happened. Michael's calls to the Attorney General's office had reached sympathetic ears, expedited by the evidence they discovered. Investigator Reeves turned her attention to Hawthorne's security team. Gentlemen, I suggest you return to your vehicles. Interfering with a potential crime scene is a felony under Oregon statute. Her tone left no room for argument, despite lacking uniform backup. The standoff dissolved with surprising speed. Hawthorne, recognizing changed dynamics, signaled his men to withdraw while maintaining his innocent narrative, simply concerned about unsafe conditions. No one wants accidents befalling children in a structure this old, always happy to cooperate with authorities. His practiced charm failed to mask the cold calculation behind his eyes as he addressed Rebecca directly. Consider my offer, Ms. Anderson, available for 24 hours only. After that, legal processes get complicated. As the Hawthorne contingent retreated to their vehicles, Investigator Reeves approached the family, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Ms. Anderson, I apologize for the hour. Your attorney's evidence packet was compelling, especially the historical documentation of chemical dumping in protected watersheds. The state has immediate interest in investigating these allegations, which provides temporary protection for this property as a potential crime scene. Sheriff Lawson lingered at the edge of the porch, discomfort evident in his posture. Rebecca realized his presence represented a significant shift. Either he had chosen to align with the state investigation rather than Hawthorne, or the evidence was substantial enough that he couldn't ignore it without risking his own legal exposure. Either way, the midnight confrontation had unexpectedly tilted the balance of power, if only temporarily. Inside the cabin, Rebecca prepared coffee while Michael briefed the investigator on their discoveries. The children, remarkably resilient, had returned to bed after the excitement. Even Lily, who had murmured something about the lady being happy before drifting to sleep. Through the kitchen window, Rebecca watched dawn light filtering through ancient trees, illuminating the property her family had nearly lost. The legacy Eleanor had died protecting. The chessboard caught her attention as she returned with coffee mugs. The pieces had moved again, white now clearly dominating the board victory within reach. Martha's voice came from the doorway, having arrived with Investigator Reeves, though remaining silent during the legal discussions. Eleanor always did love chess, taught half the town's children how to play. Always said life was like a chess game, not about who has the most pieces, but who sees the most moves ahead. Rebecca touched the white queen, centerpiece of the Sullivan defense position. For 40 years, Eleanor had waited pieces arranged for a game only now reaching its conclusion. Justice delayed, but perhaps not denied. She turned to join the others, ready to continue the battle her great-aunt had begun. From a distance, the cabin stood sentinel in the morning light. Not just a structure of wood and stone, but a repository of truth long buried. Within its walls, the past reached across decades to reclaim its voice, and a family discovered that home isn't just where you live, but what you're willing to fight for. 3 weeks after the midnight confrontation, the Sullivan cabin stood transformed. Yellow police tape marked sections of the property where state environmental teams had extracted soil samples. Tarps covered areas where archaeological experts had carefully excavated the ridge site, recovering evidence buried for decades. Inside, the main room had become an impromptu investigation headquarters. Maps spread across the wooden table, timelines tacked to walls, and photographs documenting every piece of evidence against Hawthorne Enterprises. Rebecca sat on the porch steps watching Noah demonstrate his metal detector skills to one of the younger state investigators. Her son had appointed himself Assistant Environmental Specialist, taking his role with characteristic enthusiasm. The official investigation had breathed new life into their precarious situation. With the cabin designated a crime scene and potential historical site, the sheriff's eviction threats held no power. The Hawthorne legal team could only watch from a distance as state authorities methodically built their case. Investigator Elizabeth Reeves approached clipboard in hand and determination in her stride. The soil results confirmed what we suspected. Toxic chemical concentrations, 20 times legal limits, matching the compounds used in Hawthorne's furniture manufacturing during the 70s. Her direct manner had become familiar over weeks of collaboration. We've located 3 additional dump sites based on Eleanor's documentation, all on contested boundary areas, all contaminated with the same signature chemicals. Michael's car appeared on the dirt road, kicking up dust as he returned from the county courthouse. His daily trips to file motions, request documents, and build their civil case had taken on renewed purpose since the state investigation began. He parked beside the official vehicles and emerged with the satisfied expression of a man delivering good news. The judge granted our motion to freeze any property transactions related to the disputed boundaries. Hawthorne can't sell, develop, or transfer any part of this land until ownership is legally determined. The attorney spread new documents across the porch railing, county records recovered from backup archives in Salem. The state capitol's records had survived Hawthorne's convenient courthouse fire, providing crucial verification of the original Sullivan property lines. Michael pointed to survey maps where official boundaries had been altered, the changes subtle but significant. Each modification expanded Hawthorne's timber holdings while reducing Eleanor's property. Taken individually, they might seem like minor surveyor errors. Together, they revealed systematic fraud spanning decades. Investigator Reeves examined the boundary alterations with professional interest. This connects directly to the environmental crimes. Every illegal dump site falls within these disputed areas. Hawthorne deliberately polluted land he knew wasn't legally his, then fabricated ownership documents to control the contaminated sites. Her analysis confirmed what Eleanor had discovered decades earlier, a calculated strategy to acquire land while hiding evidence of environmental crimes. Rebecca's attention shifted to Olivia, who approached from Martha's truck with grocery bags. The 16-year-old had taken responsibility for practical necessities while adults focused on legal battles. Beneath her practical exterior, Rebecca recognized the quiet pride Olivia took in contributing to their family's fight. Each passing day strengthened her daughter's confidence, transforming the crisis into unexpected growth. School began next week, and arrangements had been made for the children to attend Pine Creek's small district, another step toward normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. Lily emerged from the cabin sketchbook clutched to her chest. The youngest Anderson had filled dozens of pages with drawings over the past weeks, detailed landscapes of the property portraits of Eleanor, based solely on photographs and disturbingly accurate depictions of locations where evidence was later discovered. The investigators had stopped questioning the child's uncanny knowledge, simply adding "check Lily's drawings" to their evidence collection protocol. The 8-year-old settled beside Rebecca, flipping to her latest creation, a courtroom scene with her mother standing confidently before a judge. Martha arrived with the evening meal, her contributions keeping the family nourished through turbulent weeks. The elderly woman had become their strongest local ally, her store transforming into an unofficial community center, where support for the Anderson family gradually outweighed Hawthorne's long-established influence. Martha's decades of goodwill proved stronger currency than Hawthorne's economic leverage, as evidence of his environmental crimes spread through local conversation. Inside, Rebecca spread a local newspaper across the kitchen counter, examining the headline with mixed emotions. State investigation targets Hawthorne Enterprises, historical environmental crimes alleged. The article detailed the ongoing investigation without sensationalism, laying out facts about the chemical dumping property disputes and Eleanor's documentation. Most significant was the final paragraph mentioning renewed interest in the disappearance of Eleanor Sullivan in 1978, previously classified as voluntary relocation. The shift in public narrative represented a crucial victory. For decades, Eleanor had been erased, her resistance forgotten, her disappearance explained away. Now her name appeared in print, her fight acknowledged. Rebecca traced the words with her fingertip, feeling an invisible thread connecting her to the great aunt she'd never met, but whose battle she now continued. Somewhere between document filings and soil samples, this had become more than a legal fight for property rights. It was restoration of a legacy nearly lost to corruption and intimidation. Michael joined her, reviewing case notes with the focused determination that had characterized their partnership since that first meeting in Martha's store. The legal path forward held both promise and peril. Hawthorne's team had shifted strategies, no longer denying the environmental violations, but instead creating distance between current operations and historical management decisions. Their latest filing attempted to separate Richard Hawthorne Sr. personally from corporate actions, claiming decisions were made by departments without his direct knowledge. That evening, as Rebecca tucked Lily into bed, her daughter posed the question that adults had carefully avoided. Are they going to find Eleanor's body on our land? The directness typical of her age contrasted with the weight of her words. Rebecca perched on the edge of the mattress, considering her response. The investigation is looking everywhere, Eleanor's notes indicated. If she's here, they'll find her and make sure she's properly honored. The child nodded, accepting the gentle truth rather than comforting fiction. The lady doesn't mind waiting. She just wanted someone to know what happened. Morning brought the arrival of a forensic anthropology team, their university credentials and specialized equipment confirming the investigation's expanding scope. Rebecca watched from the porch as they unloaded ground-penetrating radar equipment and mapping tools. Investigator Reeves coordinated their efforts, directing them toward the ridge site where Noah and Rebecca had discovered the ammunition box. The implications hung unspoken. They were officially searching for human remains. Michael arrived with his paralegal Jessica, whose research skills had proven invaluable in constructing their legal timeline. They spread new documents across the kitchen table, financial records showing massive withdrawals from Hawthorne Enterprises accounts coinciding with Eleanor's disappearance. None of the money had been traced to Eleanor's personal accounts, contradicting the official narrative that she had sold her property and relocated. Instead, large cash transactions appeared in Sheriff Davis's records in the accounts of County Judge Williams, key figures photographed in Eleanor's hidden documentation. Around noon, a commotion at the property's edge drew everyone's attention. Two black SUVs with Hawthorne logos parked beside the state police vehicles. Richard Hawthorne Jr. emerged from the first, accompanied by a silver-haired man in an expensive suit whom Rebecca recognized from news coverage, Carson Reed Hawthorne's chief legal counsel. From the second vehicle came Richard Hawthorne Sr., himself leaning heavily on a monogrammed cane, his face set in lines of aristocratic displeasure. Investigator Reeves intercepted them before they reached the cabin official clipboard, creating a symbolic barrier. "This is an active investigation site, gentlemen. Access is restricted to authorized personnel." Carson Reed stepped forward, extending documents with practiced smoothness. "We have a court order allowing Mr. Hawthorne to inspect his property during the investigation, provided we don't interfere with evidence collection. The environmental matter is between the state and Hawthorne Enterprises, but this land dispute remains a civil issue." Michael joined the confrontation, reviewing the court order with professional scrutiny. His expression revealed the document's legitimacy, despite his obvious displeasure. Judge Carlton's signature. Typical, the wealthy always get special accommodation. The elder Hawthorne's eyes narrowed at the comment, but he maintained the polished veneer of civility that had served his business interests for decades. "Merely checking on property that has belonged to my company for 40 years, counselor. No harm in that." Rebecca watched from the porch as the Hawthorne contingent began a slow tour of the property, Investigator Reeves and a state police officer accompanying them as unwanted chaperones. Richard Sr. moved with the stiffness of age but missing nothing, his gaze calculating as he assessed the investigation's progress. His son maintained a diplomatic distance from the proceedings, smartphone constantly in hand, as he documented the scene with photos and messages. The unspoken threat was clear. They were gathering ammunition for future legal challenges. When the tour reached the cabin, Rebecca met them at the steps, unwilling to allow Hawthorne access to what had become her family's home without acknowledgement of her presence. The elderly businessman surveyed the structure with feigned concern. "Shame to see Sullivan property in such disrepair." Eleanor was always so particular about maintenance. His attempt at familiarity with a woman he had likely murdered struck Rebecca as obscene, but she maintained her composure. "We've been focused on repairing the damage from decades of neglect after she disappeared." His eyes flickered, momentary crack in the facade before smoothing into practiced neutrality. Lily appeared in the doorway behind Rebecca, observing the visitors with unchildlike intensity. Her focus fixed on Richard Sr., head tilted as if listening to an unheard voice. The businessman's attention shifted to the child, something unreadable passing across his features. "Your daughter, I presume. Quite the resemblance to the Sullivan women. Strong bloodline." The observation carried an undertone that raised Rebecca's maternal defenses. Lily stepped forward before she could intervene. "The lady says you're afraid of what's buried on the ridge." Her clear voice carried across the suddenly silent porch. "The lady with silver hair. She says you never thought anyone would dig there." The child's words landed with precision despite her innocent delivery. Richard Sr.'s complexion paled beneath his country club tan hand tightening visibly around his cane. His son stepped forward, attempting to salvage the increasingly uncomfortable situation with corporate smoothness. "Children have such active imaginations. We should continue the inspection." Rebecca placed protective hands on Lily's shoulders, addressing Hawthorne directly. "My daughter has a particular connection to this property, and to Eleanor. She seems to know things about the past that even I find surprising." Her deliberate emphasis on Eleanor's name caused the older man to flinch. Subtle but unmistakable. How interesting that a man claiming purely business interest in this land would react so viscerally to a child's imagination. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for a shout from the ridge site where the anthropology team had been working all morning. Investigator Reeves's radio crackled with urgent voices. She listened intently before fixing Hawthorne with a calculating gaze. I believe we're going to need to cut this inspection short, gentlemen. New developments require securing the entire property. Her professional tone couldn't quite mask the satisfaction beneath. I'll have an officer escort you to the boundary. When the unwelcome visitors had departed, Rebecca joined the gathering at the ridge site. The ground-penetrating radar had revealed an anomaly exactly where Lily had indicated, an area of disturbed soil approximately 6 feet long, buried beneath decades of natural forest accumulation. The anthropology team leader pointed to distinctive patterns on their equipment display, consistent with what we'd expect to find with human remains. We'll need proper excavation protocols before proceeding further. Investigator Reeves pulled Rebecca aside, her professional demeanor softening slightly. If this is what we suspect, things will change dramatically. We'll need to bring in the FBI. This becomes a potential murder investigation crossing multiple jurisdictions: environmental crimes, corruption, and homicide. The property will be secured as a federal crime scene. Her implication was clear. The Anderson family's situation would become even more complicated despite the strengthening of their legal position. That evening, as news of the discovery spread through official channels, Martha arrived with unexpected information. Word at the diner is that Richard Sr. collapsed after returning to the estate. They called an ambulance. The elderly woman's network of local connections provided intelligence no official investigation could match. Junior is supposedly gathering the board of directors for an emergency session tonight. Something about succession planning and corporate restructuring. Michael's legal mind immediately grasped the implications. They're preparing for charges against the patriarch, creating distance between his personal actions and corporate assets. His expression reflected grudging professional respect. Smart move. If Richard Sr. faces criminal charges for Eleanor's death, they'll try to insulate the company and family fortune from the fallout. The following days brought escalating activity. FBI agents established a command center in the clearing beside the cabin. The ridge site transformed into a meticulous archaeological excavation, white tents protecting the area from weather and unauthorized observation. Journalists gathered at the property boundary, held back by state police, but capturing footage of the official vehicles and investigation teams. Local television ran special reports on the Sullivan Mystery, featuring historical photographs of Eleanor and interviews with elderly residents who remembered her environmental activism. On the 5th day of the federal investigation, Rebecca received the call she had been both expecting and dreading. Investigator Reeves' voice carried the weight of confirmation. We've recovered human remains consistent with a female in her 60s. Preliminary examination suggests blunt force trauma to the skull. The official's professional tone couldn't mask the human compassion beneath. I'm sorry, Ms. Anderson. Everything indicates this is your great-aunt Eleanor. The news spread through the family with quiet reverence. Noah's typical enthusiasm subdued into thoughtful maturity beyond his years. Olivia organized a small memorial space on the mantel, placing Eleanor's photograph and journal in a position of honor. Lily showed no surprise, having seemingly known the outcome long before adults confirmed it. The child simply nodded and continued her latest drawing, a portrait of Eleanor in the garden, smiling toward an unseen observer. Martha brought flowers from Eleanor's herb garden, tenderly arranging them beneath the photograph. She alone among them had actually known Eleanor, her grief textured with personal memories, and 4 decades of faithful tending to her friend's legacy. The property you're holding back from Hawthorne, it wasn't just land to her, it was the future she was protecting. For all of us, for children not yet born. The elderly woman's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Eleanor saw clearer and farther than most. Recognized poison in the water long before others noticed the taste. The discovery transformed public perception almost overnight. Local residents who had maintained cautious neutrality now openly supported the Anderson family's claim. The environmental crimes struck close to home. Contaminated watersheds meant potential health impacts for generations of Pine Creek families. Community members began bringing forward medical records showing unusual cancer clusters and unexplained illnesses in areas downstream from the dump sites. The case expanded beyond property rights and individual murder to community-wide harm spanning decades. Federal agents interviewed Richard Hawthorne Sr. at the hospital, where he remained under observation following his collapse. Though details weren't publicly disclosed, Michael's legal contacts reported the businessman had invoked his Fifth Amendment rights almost immediately. Meanwhile, Richard Jr. held a press conference announcing his father's retirement due to health concerns and unveiling a corporate restructuring that placed him as CEO with a new board of directors. His prepared statement expressed deep concern about historical allegations and pledged full cooperation with authorities investigating environmental management practices from earlier decades. Rebecca recognized the strategy for what it was: controlled demolition of Richard Sr.'s reputation to preserve the Hawthorne corporate empire. The son would sacrifice his father to protect the family fortune, presenting himself as the reformer, cleaning up historical mistakes. The calculation felt bloodless, yet effective, a corporate version of the same ruthlessness that had likely led to Eleanor's murder. On a rainy Tuesday morning, investigator Reeves arrived with federal agents carrying official documentation. A federal judge had approved their request for arrest warrants based on evidence recovered from the property. Richard Hawthorne Sr. faced charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, environmental crimes, and corruption. Former Sheriff Davis, now in his 80s and living in a retirement community in Arizona, would be charged as an accessory. Judge Williams had died years earlier, escaping justice but not historical judgment as his role became public record. Most significantly for the Anderson family, the federal court had issued an emergency injunction invalidating all Hawthorne claims to the Sullivan property pending final legal determination. The cabin and surrounding land were officially recognized as disputed territory with strong evidence supporting the Sullivan family claim. Rebecca could remain with her children without fear of eviction or harassment while the criminal and civil cases proceeded. The news brought relief, but not celebration. Eleanor's recovered remains provided the strongest evidence against Hawthorne, but reminded them of the human cost behind legal victories. As federal agents departed with their documentation and updates, Rebecca found herself alone on the porch, rain pattering against the roof in gentle rhythm. The chessboard inside showed the final position, white triumphant, but the victory hollow given the pieces sacrificed to achieve it. Michael arrived that evening with Martha, both carrying files documenting the cabin's history and Eleanor's legal paperwork. They spread the materials across the kitchen table while the children listened from the staircase, absorbing adult concerns with remarkable patience. The federal case against Hawthorne appeared strong, but the civil matter of property ownership still required resolution. Eleanor's will naming Gene Sullivan's descendants as heirs created a clear legal path, but 40 years of Hawthorne occupation and development complicated matters. They must have known about Eleanor's will. That's why they covered up her death rather than risk it going through probate. Michael's legal analysis cut through complications to the core motivation. If she had officially died, the will would have been executed and the property would have transferred to Jean, your grandmother. They needed Eleanor to simply disappear so the fake sale documents would stand unchallenged. Martha nodded, memories sharpening with validation after decades of suspicion. Eleanor told me she'd updated her will after Jean married and had children, said Sullivan land should stay with Sullivan blood. Her weathered hands traced the property boundaries on the survey map. She knew Hawthorne was desperate for this particular section. The watershed access made it invaluable for anyone who understood water rights in Oregon. The elderly woman's finger rested on the convergence point of 3 streams that fed into the larger river system supplying Pine Creek. Eleanor's grandfather chose this land specifically for the water rights. In the West, water has always been more valuable than gold. Her explanation clarified what had initially seemed an excessive response to a simple property dispute. Hawthorne hadn't killed Eleanor just for timber access or to hide environmental crimes. He had eliminated the only obstacle to controlling the entire watershed, a resource that would appreciate in value exponentially as climate change intensified water scarcity throughout the region. The realization brought both clarity and concern. If water rights represented the true value, Hawthorne Enterprises would fight even harder to maintain control. Richard Jr.'s apparent cooperation with authorities might be strategic misdirection, sacrificing his father and historical timber operations to protect future water rights worth billions in coming decades. The chess game continued, despite the apparent victory pieces moving towards objectives not immediately visible on the board. Rebecca woke before dawn the following morning, restlessness drawing her to the porch where fog shrouded the property in ethereal gray. The forest appeared otherworldly, ancient trees emerging as shadowy sentinels from the mist. Movement at the property's edge caught her attention. A deer and fawn picking their way delicately through underbrush, unaware of human dramas unfolding in their territory. The moment captured everything Eleanor had fought to protect. Not just land, but the interconnected web of life dependent on uncontaminated water and soil. A sound behind her revealed Lily blanket wrapped around the small shoulders as she joined her mother on the porch steps. The lady says she can rest now. The child's matter-of-fact delivery had become familiar, no longer raising questions about imagination versus something more mysterious. Lily leaned against Rebecca's side, a warm anchor to the present amid thoughts of the past. She says to look in the blue jar in the root cellar. There's something important there she saved for family. The root cellar, accessed from outside the cabin, had yielded preserved vegetables and supplies during their first days of occupation. Rebecca had inventoried its contents but hadn't examined each container individually. Now, following her daughter's direction, she descended the earthen steps into the cool underground storage space. Along the back wall stood dozens of canning jars, their contents preserved through decades. Among them, a distinctive blue mason jar contained not food, but rolled papers secured with wax sealing. Rebecca brought her discovery to the kitchen table, where morning light could illuminate the fragile documents. Inside, Eleanor had preserved water rights certificates dating to the original Sullivan land grant of 1887. The paperwork established perpetual rights to the watershed originating on the property, rights separate from land ownership and transferable only through specific legal procedures never completed in Hawthorne's fraudulent acquisition. Even if Hawthorne had legitimately purchased the land, which he hadn't, these water rights would have remained with the Sullivan family unless explicitly included in the sale. When Michael arrived for their daily strategy session, he examined the certificates with growing excitement. This changes everything. These rights were never recorded as transferred to Hawthorne. They've been using the water illegally for 40 years. His legal mind calculated implications rapidly. The statute of limitations doesn't apply because the theft continues with every gallon they divert. This is worth more than the land itself, especially with the climate projections showing decreased rainfall in coming decades. Rebecca spread maps across the table tracing the watershed boundaries with newfound understanding. Eleanor had protected not just her family homestead, but a critical resource for the entire region. The larger environmental vision explained her detailed documentation of the chemical dumping, not just evidence of corporate wrongdoing, but proof of deliberate poisoning of a precious community resource. Her great-aunt had seen interconnections that others missed, fought a battle few understood, and ultimately given her life to protect something essential for generations unborn. As the federal investigation proceeded, Richard Hawthorne Sr. was formally charged with Eleanor's murder. The medical examiner confirmed what the Sullivan family had long suspected: blunt force trauma consistent with intentional homicide followed by burial at the remote ridge site. Soil samples from the grave contained the same chemical signature as Hawthorne's industrial waste, suggesting he had contaminated the burial site deliberately to mask evidence. The calculated cruelty of using toxic chemicals to hide his victim struck Rebecca as the perfect encapsulation of the man's character. Richard Jr. continued his public relations campaign, announcing a corporate environmental remediation fund and pledging to address historical issues while maintaining his father's actions represented personal rather than corporate decisions. His legal team filed motions to separate the murder case from any claims against Hawthorne Enterprises, attempting to shield corporate assets from potential judgments. The strategy revealed the son's true priorities: preserving wealth rather than justice, protecting the family name rather than acknowledging its bloody foundation. The water rights certificates added a new dimension to their legal claim. Michael filed emergency motions with the federal court overseeing the criminal case, introducing the certificates as evidence of additional theft and resource appropriation. The court responded by expanding the property injunction to include all water resources originating on Sullivan land, effectively blocking Hawthorne Enterprises from utilizing the watershed for their remaining operations in the area. The impact rippled through Pine Creek's economic ecosystem. Hawthorne operations dependent on water access faced immediate crisis. The sawmill operating downstream announced temporary closure while alternative water sources were evaluated. Housing developments built by Hawthorne Enterprises revealed inadequate water rights, their property values plummeting overnight as the legal basis for their utility services came into question. The house of cards built on Eleanor's stolen legacy began collapsing, revealing the extent to which Pine Creek had been shaped by a single act of violence 4 decades earlier. Community response crystallized around the Anderson family, not universal support as many residents depended on Hawthorne Enterprises for employment, but growing recognition that their town had been built on corruption requiring correction. Town council meetings became forums for passionate debate about responsibility and restoration. Michael attended each session, presenting documentation of environmental damage and potential remediation plans that could create new jobs while addressing historical wrongs. 1 month after the discovery of Eleanor's remains, Rebecca received an unexpected visitor. Richard Hawthorne Jr. arrived alone without legal counsel or corporate entourage. His luxury car seemed out of place beside the cabin, his tailored suit incongruous against the backdrop of forest and investigation equipment. Rebecca met him on the porch, maintaining the physical and psychological high ground as he approached with carefully neutral expression. "I've come without attorneys or witnesses, Mrs. Anderson." To discuss resolution, his tone lacked the arrogance displayed during earlier encounters, replaced by calculated pragmatism. "My father will likely spend his remaining years in prison, appropriate given what's been uncovered. I'm prepared to acknowledge the Sullivan claim to this property and surrounding lands." His offer hung in the autumn air, surprising in its apparent reasonableness. Rebecca studied him carefully, recognizing the corporate strategy behind the personal approach: minimize losses by conceding the battle already lost. "What about the water rights?" Her question pierced directly to his true motivation. Richard Jr. maintained his practiced composure, though his eyes revealed momentary calculation. "We would propose a sharing arrangement, historical access for existing operations balanced against Sullivan family interests." He gestured toward the forest surrounding them. "This land has value beyond sentiment. Properly managed timber harvesting could provide substantial income for your family while maintaining environmental standards." Rebecca recognized the trap within his reasonable tone. Shared water rights would legitimize Hawthorne's decades of theft while limiting the Sullivan family's control over their rightful resource. Timber harvesting would provide immediate cash flow, but surrender long-term environmental stewardship. Most importantly, the private settlement would bury the community impact of Hawthorne's crimes beneath confidentiality agreements and corporate restructuring. "I don't think you understand what this property represents, Mr. Hawthorne." Rebecca matched his professional tone while rejecting his underlying assumptions. "This isn't about maximizing financial return or finding compromise with those who murdered for profit. Eleanor protected this land for future generations, not just her family, but every child who drinks from streams your father poisoned. Any resolution must include full public disclosure, complete environmental remediation, and community restitution." Her terms represented not just financial calculation, but moral accounting. His expression hardened corporate mask, slipping to reveal the same ruthless pragmatism that had characterized his father's empire building. "Admirable idealism, Ms. Anderson, but impractical. Litigation could continue for years. Appeals, countersuits, delays. Your children might be grown before final resolution." He glanced toward the cabin where Lily watched from the window. "Consider their future. A reasonable settlement now provides security. Principle makes for cold comfort during financial hardship." Rebecca felt Eleanor's presence as strongly as if her great-aunt stood beside her on the porch. The water flowing through Sullivan land connected past to future, each molecule carrying memory downstream to generations yet unborn. Eleanor had refused compromise when offered, choosing principles over pragmatism, community welfare over personal gain. 40 years later, her great-niece faced the same fundamental choice: quick resolution that protected individual interests or protracted struggle that might achieve deeper justice. "You've miscalculated again, just as your father did with Eleanor." Rebecca's calm certainty seemed to unsettle the businessman more than anger would have. "This isn't a negotiation between equals over assets. It's accountability for crimes that harmed an entire community. The Sullivans have always understood that land isn't just property, it's responsibility. We won't perpetuate the exploitation your family has inflicted for generations." His departure carried the stiffness of unaccustomed rejection. Rebecca watched his vehicle disappear down the dirt road, knowing she had just declined the easy path forward. The choice felt right despite the uncertainty it perpetuated. Some battles extended beyond individual lifetimes, requiring commitment to principles that might not show immediate reward. Eleanor had understood this truth, planting seeds of justice she would never see bloom. Now Rebecca continued tending that garden, cultivating what her great-aunt had begun. Inside the cabin, Martha had arrived with afternoon tea, settling into the rocking chair with the comfort of familiarity. Lily climbed into the old woman's lap, continuing their ongoing exchange of stories. Martha sharing memories of Eleanor, while Lily offered insights from her mysterious conversations with the lady. The generational continuum flowed naturally between them, wisdom passing from those who remembered to those who would carry forward. Michael arrived with news from the federal investigation. They've uncovered financial records showing your grandmother received anonymous payments after Eleanor disappeared. Small amounts but regular, starting immediately after Eleanor's death and continuing until Jean's passing. His expression reflected understanding rather than judgment. We think Eleanor may have created some arrangement to protect your grandmother, even if something happened to her. A trust or insurance policy that Hawthorne couldn't touch. The revelation added another layer to Eleanor's foresight. She had protected not just land and water, but family, creating financial safeguards that operated silently for decades. The chess game had continued long after her physical presence ended moves plotted to unfold across time. Rebecca felt humbled by the depth of planning, the comprehensive vision that had accounted for contingencies spanning generations. That evening, the Anderson family gathered on the porch, watching sunset paint the forest in amber and gold. Noah had constructed a small memorial near Eleanor's favorite oak tree, arranging stones in a pattern that echoed the boundary markers defining Sullivan land. Olivia had transcribed Eleanor's journal, creating a preserved record while adding her own observations about their continuing fight. Lily had completed a series of drawings documenting their journey from eviction to inherited purpose, visual testimony, to how lives could change direction through unexpected providence. The cabin stood behind them, no longer simply shelter from desperate circumstances, but legacy made manifest. Within its walls, Eleanor's presence remained, not as supernatural visitation, but as living principle, the embodiment of choices that extended beyond individual lifespan. The Sullivan defense continued, pieces moving across generations toward justice delayed, but not forgotten. Rebecca watched darkness gather among ancient trees, thinking of roots extending beneath visible surfaces, connecting what appeared separate into unified systems. Water flowing underground, carrying minerals and memory through channels carved by time. The Sullivan property was not just land, but watershed, not just habitat, but heritage. Eleanor had understood this fundamental truth. We protect what nurtures future generations, not just what sustains our immediate needs. Stars emerged above the clearing as night claimed the forest. The same stars Eleanor had watched from this porch decades earlier, plotting her defense against forces that valued profit above people, extraction above existence. The cosmic perspective reduced human disputes to momentary conflicts in eternal cycles, yet heightened the significance of individual choices within those brief lifespans. Each generation faced its moment of decision: prioritize short-term gain or cultivate sustainable legacy. The chessboard inside had been reset, pieces arranged in starting position rather than mid-game strategy, ready for new players, new challenges, new defenses against different threats. The Sullivan legacy continued through Rebecca and her children, not as passive inheritance, but as active responsibility. Eleanor's final move had brought her family home, returning them to land and purpose they hadn't known awaited them. From the edge of the clearing, a deer and fawn emerged cautiously into moonlight, their presence testament to the resilience of natural systems when given space to recover. They paused, alert to human presence, but unafraid, before continuing toward the creek where Sullivan water flowed clean again after decades of contamination. Rebecca watched them disappear into shadow, carrying Eleanor's vindication into the living forest.